In the shadowy intersection of global finance and organized crime, few cases rival the staggering revelations of HSBC's systematic failures that emerged in 2012. What began as one of the world's most respected financial institutions transformed into what prosecutors would call a preferred financial institution for drug cartels and money launderers. A story that reads more like a crime thriller than a banking scandal. Between 2006 and 2010, HSBC Bank USA failed to monitor over $200 trillion in wire transfers, including a staggering $670 billion from HSBC Mexico, ultimately enabling drug cartels to launder at least $881 million through the U.S. financial system. The case exposed how drug trafficking organizations, including Mexico's Sinaloa cartel and Colombia's Norte del Valle cartel, exploited HSBC's lax anti-money laundering controls. In a particularly brazen scheme, traffickers designed custom-sized boxes to fit HSBC Mexico's teller windows, facilitating the rapid deposit of bulk cash. This case laid bare the catastrophic consequences of prioritizing profits over compliance and led to one of the most extensive banking reforms in recent history, fundamentally changing how global financial institutions approach anti-money laundering controls. Let me tell you about a tale of systematic failures that turned a prestigious bank into an unwitting accomplice to drug cartels. The story begins at HSBC Bank USA, where a perfect storm of poor oversight, cost-cutting, and willful ignorance created a financial gateway for criminal enterprises. Picture this. Between 2006 and 2009, while HSBC's compliance department was severely understaffed, the bank processed over $200 trillion in wire transfers with virtually no monitoring. Why? Because they deliberately classified high-risk countries like Mexico as standard risk to bypass their own security systems. This wasn't just negligence, it was a calculated decision to keep the money flowing. In Mexico, the situation was even more alarming. Drug cartels had literally designed custom-sized boxes to fit HSBC Mexico's teller windows, enabling them to deposit massive amounts of cash efficiently. The bank's Cayman Islands accounts became a favorite tool for money launderers, with over 35,000 accounts operating by 2008, including 2,200 high-risk accounts holding $205 million in suspicious funds. The failures cascaded through multiple levels. When HSBC Mexico's compliance team flagged suspicious accounts for closure, senior business executives repeatedly overruled them. In one particularly telling incident, a senior compliance officer complained that the AML committee needed some cojones to stand up to business leaders who were rubber-stamping risky clients. The violations were numerous and severe, willfully failing to maintain an effective anti-money laundering program, deliberately circumventing the Bank Secrecy Act, violating sanctions against Iran, Libya, Sudan, Burma, and Cuba, knowingly processing transactions for drug cartels. These problems surfaced through multiple channels. Mexican financial regulators raised red flags about HSBC's unusually high dollar exports. U.S. law enforcement investigations revealed the cartel connections. Perhaps most damningly, in 2008, Mexican law enforcement informed HSBC Mexico's CEO that they had recordings of a drug lord specifically naming HSBC as their preferred bank for money laundering. The responsibility spread across the organization. HSBC Group's leadership knew about the problems but failed to inform HSBC Bank USA. The bank's compliance department was deliberately understaffed. By 2007, they had fewer AML employees than required by their own internal plans. In a stark example of misplaced priorities, When senior compliance officers left, their positions weren't filled to save costs. By the time the dust settled, it was revealed that at least $881 million in drug trafficking proceeds had been laundered through HSBC Bank USA. The Sinaloa cartel alone moved over $1.1 billion through HSBC Mexico branches in Sinaloa state between 2006 and 2008. What makes this story particularly striking is that these weren't just technical violations of banking regulations. These failures enabled real criminal enterprises to prosper, fueling drug trafficking, violence, and international crime. The bank's actions, or rather inactions, weren't just about money. They had real-world consequences affecting communities across multiple continents. This case fundamentally changed how banks approach compliance, leading to massive reforms within HSBC and setting new standards for the entire banking industry. It serves as a stark reminder that financial institutions don't just have a legal obligation to prevent money laundering, they have a moral one as well. In 2012, HSBC faced a historic $1.9 billion settlement for its compliance failures, at the time, the largest penalty ever imposed on a bank. But here's what makes this particularly interesting. Rather than face immediate criminal prosecution, HSBC entered into a deferred prosecution agreement, DPA, with the U.S. Department of Justice. The penalty was structured in two main parts: a $256 billion forfeiture and $665 million in civil penalties. The civil penalties were broken down among various regulators: $500 million to the Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, $165 million to the Federal Reserve, and the New York County District Attorney's Office collected the remainder. What's fascinating is that while $1.9 billion sounds massive, it represented only about 5 weeks of HSBC's profits at the time. Some critics argued this was merely a cost of doing business, rather than a truly punitive measure. The bank's cooperation with authorities, extensive remedial actions, and the potential economic impact of a criminal conviction were all factors that influenced the final settlement amount and the decision to pursue a DPA rather than criminal charges. Here's what every compliance officer should take away from the HSBC case. It's a masterclass in what happens when fundamental AML controls break down. First and foremost, the 3 lines of defense must be robust and independent. Business units cannot be allowed to override compliance decisions about high-risk customers. When HSBC's AML committee wanted to close suspicious accounts, business executives shouldn't have had the power to overrule them. That's a critical governance failure. Know your customer, KYC. Processes must be thorough and consistent, regardless of whether you're dealing with affiliates or third parties. HSBC's failure to conduct due diligence on its own affiliates created massive blind spots. Every customer, including group entities, needs proper risk assessment and ongoing monitoring. Transaction monitoring systems must be calibrated based on genuine risk assessment, not business convenience. HSBC's decision to classify Mexico as standard risk to avoid triggering alerts was a catastrophic misjudgment. Risk ratings must reflect real-world factors: geographic risk, customer profiles, transaction patterns, and external intelligence. Resource allocation is crucial. 1 or 2 compliance officers cannot effectively monitor thousands of transactions. Compliance staffing should be based on risk exposure and transaction volume, not cost-cutting targets. Finally, there must be clear escalation paths and information-sharing protocols. The fact that HSBC Group knew about problems in Mexico but didn't inform HSBC USA shows a critical communication failure. A global bank needs global compliance standards and transparent information sharing. Remember, Compliance isn't just about ticking boxes. It's about creating effective barriers against financial crime. When these barriers fail, the consequences extend far beyond regulatory fines. That's why we're on a mission to help you understand these financial crimes through real court cases like HSBC's. Because let's face it, learning from someone else's mistakes is a lot cheaper than making your own. Hit subscribe, tap that notification bell, and leave a comment below telling us which financial crime case you want us to break down next. Because remember, in the world of financial crime, what you don't know can hurt you. Stay safe, stay informed, and we'll see you in the next video.